So I founded Purple Lizard Maps. Part of that, how to explain where that came from and how that happened, is a little bit tricky because I don't know that I really know. I think that's sort of, obviously I must have had a map inside of me that needed to come out at some point, which is probably a sentiment that most people in this room can wrap their heads around. But in 1995, I did graduate from Penn State, so that was a first-generation digital cartographer. My introduction to cartography and geography through that lab certainly greatly influenced my career trajectory as a geographer. There's absolutely, I can't say enough good things about that Daisy Geographic Lab, about the people, the faculty, the opportunities that I had there, and also just that timing, 95, that was first generation digital cartography. So I didn't really have any competition in the job market to some degree. I accepted a job before I graduated from Trails Illustrated in Evergreen, Colorado. And I was part of a small team that was tasked with helping them transition from their legacy of manual cartography into digital cartography. It was the era of Macromedia freehand. It was the era of not having resources like PASDOR or data accesses. So we were scanning our own topo maps so that we could digitize our own topo maps and things like that. I worked with them for about 2 years, and I got relatively bored relatively quickly because part of this goes back to the creativity that was instilled with me in that Penn State CART lab, where there were no boundaries on what you could do. And most of the industry was looking at digital cartography as a mechanism to replicate the maps that had been made by hand. And that was what Trails Illustrated wanted to do. It's like, just use the computer but make them look like this. So we would be like, there's this thing called shaded relief. Not interested in that. Contour lines are great. There's a font library. We're not interested in that. We have certain fonts. We have certain colors. So creatively, that wasn't a great match for me. So I bailed, quit what would have been a great career and a great job, and got a room back in my old college apartment with some of the same geography roommates, leaned on some of my friends and colleagues that were at the Daisy Geographics lab, and said, I want to make a trail map of a forest, a state forest in Pennsylvania right outside of Penn State. And I worked on that for about a year, and I raised money to make that happen, and I published that map. I raised money through friends and family. I came up with a figure. I needed $15,000. I asked 15 friends and family members if they'd risk $1,000, and they did. And I published my first map, and it did pretty well. And I was basically making a living as a freelance cartographer. I was making phone book maps for MapQuest. There's people in the room that probably remember what that was like. All kinds of things you could do as a freelance cartographer with the power of desktop publishing and an Apple computer. And we were just beyond the floppy disk. It was that level of data. That also then opened up a door with the University of Maine. So I started Purple Lizard, and then I sort of left Purple Lizard. I took a job with the University of Maine. I had a great opportunity there to design the Historic Atlas of Maine. Cindy Brewer was very helpful in opening up some doors to have that happen. And that was supposed to be a 2-year gig. It was a 10-year gig. Atlases are complicated and academics move slowly. However, we made a wonderful atlas. I thought Purple Lizard Maps might sort of die on the vine, but it didn't. I kept that sort of map alive, and it was just sort of a side hustle. When my short decade in academics, we published the atlas, and I didn't really want to just try to be a cartographer at the University of Maine. We couldn't really follow that act. The atlas was like an awesome piece, and I was ready for something else. So I put my energy back into Purple Lizard. So that brings us back to like roughly 2010 was sort of when I was like, all right, I'm going to be a freelance cartographer again. I had much higher level clients at that point to make that transition. resurrected the brand Purple Lizard Maps and started to add some titles to it. And now 13 years later, we're rolling along kind of nicely. We have 17 maps in the market right now in 4 states and Puerto Rico. We have 4 maps in production right now. And when I say we, most people that see a Purple Lizard map, maybe they see it in a local outfitter, or maybe they see it in the flagship store in Washington, D.C. in REI, and they assume we're like a corporate map company, which is great. That's flattering. But we're not. Purple Lizard Maps is basically 3 cartographers, none of us really working full-time as cartographers. If we were a band, I would say we would be something like ZZ Top. Put out a lot of music with not many people. For the Canadians, maybe we're Rush. And when I say we, it is basically Aaron Greb, who's a rock star cartographer right there. Aaron's a huge part of Purple Lizard Maps. And Bill Wilgus, who works in the studio with me Monday through Friday. He's not here because somebody has to be back at the studio. We have 4 maps in production right now. We have one that's getting ready to go to press in the next 2 weeks or so. And then, like every good band, we need a band manager to pull this off. So my wife, Justine, is definitely the rock star band manager. She handles promotion, advertising, outreach, websites, legal, negotiations, handles money and accountants and taxes and all the other things that you have to get a map company off the ground and sustainable. And I'll talk a little bit about those 2 sides of it, basically. This is our most recent product this spring. We did a 2-map series of Shenandoah National Park. It gives you an idea of the types of maps we make. Our maps are big. They're 2 feet by 3 feet. In that case, there's like the north side with cover on it and the south side, and that would be the north and south side of the north side of the Shenandoah map series. We work with shaded relief and contour lines, and we're basically mapping all the recreational assets that exist on that landscape. So we're not locked into saying we're making hiking maps or we're making mountain bike maps. We are trying to unlock a really broad landscape for anybody that's interested in outdoor recreation, not just what might be on the public land, although our main goal is to differentiate public from private land. So the shades of greens are all different public lands and the softer yellow is private land. But there's often a lot of recreational assets or cultural assets or historical things on those private land parcels that we want to sort of unlock for people as well. We print the maps on waterproof synthetic paper, like most of the outdoor map industry does. This gives a little bit of more of a close-up of what our sort of overall design aesthetic has matured from. I could have put that side by side with the first map from 1997, but it would have just looked like dreck. Like most of us, you look at your older work, especially work that old. That first map won a lot of awards. It didn't have contour lines. It had shaded relief. We tried to do contour lines, but the computing power wasn't really there, you know, and that was sort of, even the shaded relief process was quasi-legally run through the Daisy Geographics Lab after I was no longer a student at the Daisy, after I had graduated from Penn State, back on that first one. You know, culturally, we're also trying to add other information. You can't, it's probably not that legible, but, you know, there's a call out up there on native history. We pay a lot of attention to native place names, historical features, cultural features, and I think we're really making some of the prettiest, best looking maps in the outdoor rec industry these days, and we certainly get that feedback from our customers. So one of the reasons that we have such a loyal following is we actually do field work. We are in the landscapes that we map, and so as a geographer, honestly, that's like the best of both worlds. That's so wonderful for me, and like literally the voices of a lot of my Penn State professors, the ones that did more urban or cultural type geography, the Pierce Lewises, that era, they resonate in my head when I'm driving through these landscapes because I'm deciphering a landscape, interpreting it in a slightly different way for our maps. But we are trying to figure out what's real and what's not real in the areas that we map. So the only way you can really do that is to immerse yourself in those landscapes. Harrison showed the big plotter. Everyone assumes we might have these big plotters. They're useless for field work. You can't work with a big piece of paper in a truck like that. What works really good for us, both financially and just physically, is we use one of the larger Epson color printers with a 13 by 19 tray, and we print that tiles out, 4 tiles of a 2-foot by 3-foot map with a little bit of overlap. We print it on glossy photo paper for the durability and the ease of writing on it with Sharpies. And so in this shot in the truck, we do it in a full-size pickup truck also, honestly, for the room, because that is like a small table between the 2 front bucket seats. And the 2 front bucket seats are like baby versions of first-class airline seats that we never get to travel in. But field work it's long days. It sounds romantic, but that's 8 to 10 hours driving. And we've found our tolerance for that is about 3.5 days, not counting the distance to drive to wherever the location is. And we can cover about 100 miles, 125 miles of dirt and paved roads in that window of time. We're running an Avenza tablet on an iPad with a prototype, a mock-up of whatever state our map is in. And then I probably have a forestry map there on the steering wheel comparing whatever the public use matter is, and then to whatever my clipboard is. Because data is bad. We bring in all kinds of data. And Erin is like the data queen. Erin mines data like nobody's business. And I think I was having this conversation maybe with Cindy or some people in the hallway the other day. It used to be in the early days that this whole data process was additive. You started with a blank slate and you had to find data. That might mean you had to scan a topo map and digitize it. Now it's the opposite. We bring in such a tremendous amount of data from a variety of sources, from government sources, from semi-trusted sources, and from open source public sources like the Trailforks and the Stravas and things like that. And so now you're just overlaying all these spaghetti files of data, and then we're trying to figure out what makes sense and what doesn't. So that's sort of, you pull out some anomalies, you learn what you can learn back in the office, but you know where the problem areas are out in the field. And although we use those digital tablets to take notes, it's still way more efficient to actually draw on the map and then go back to the office and make your edits that way. So that's like the short part of how we make the maps. The workflow is Avenza Map Publisher, Adobe Illustrator, Photoshop, and now Edward. Making the maps is just half the puzzle. You have to sell the maps. You've created a beast now that you have to feed. And you've printed a lot of maps. You've paid a lot of money to print maps, and you have to sell them. So this whole side of selling maps and marketing maps and how you go about doing that starts with a website. We do consumer direct sales. That's probably a little over 50% of our total income comes from people going online and ordering maps from us. Justine does a lot of the website work. Websites are tricky. Websites don't always work. Sometimes it's not our fault. This is a Shopify-based e-commerce platform website. We have 2 websites. One is for dealer orders, so we have a wholesale selling as well as a retail selling. Most map companies or small publishers often work directly with a distributor so that you don't do any of this. And I did that in that decade I was at the University of Maine. And I did it a little bit afterwards, but it's a real double-edged sword working with a distributor because first off, distributors get bought and sold. Distributors don't necessarily have an allegiance to you as a publisher. They have long lag times. So if I publish a map in the fall and I paid for the map and I want to sell it now, and you're like, hey, distributor, we've got a map for you. And they're like, hey, that sounds cool. We'll put that in the 2024 catalog for you. And you're like, I have a warehouse full of maps. I have to get them out now. So we actually are not in distribution with any distributors now. We have our own network. The other weird thing with distributors is you don't know who your customers are. When we were traveling, you'd walk into an outdoor store and be like, oh, cool, there's our maps. Like, who are you? How did you get them? But also, so we had no communication with where our maps were. So now we have a really wonderful and complicated direct line communication to our dealers and our retailers, our customer base. So this is Appalachian Outdoors in Penn State. I do like when I see a ratio of like 80-20 Purple Lizard to National Geographic, but that's hyper-localized, although we have really good, strong presence in distributions in REIs and LL Beans and public lands as well. This, we have to provide, and we design our own ways to display the maps. So that's a laser-etched Purple Lizard wooden display. And if you look closely, that's Anton Thomas's first world map on the studio wall behind it. Another self-publishing cartographer on his own journey. You have to mail maps, ship maps out. So we have to be set up to sell between about 100 or 300 maps at a time. And that has to happen, but they might need it the next day, they might need it a week later. You learn a lot about how much cardboard costs. We also have to have a whole social media side, so Facebook and Instagram. I wouldn't say we're influencers, but we have a good following. We share our field work with our customer base. We brought our customer base to NACIS with us. So hashtag NACIS 2023 if anybody's like doing the social thing. And I really like that we get, for the most part, very positive emails and comments from people. They get the map and they really like it, which is good. That's all. We like the positive feedback on that. At some point, you realize that you're not just making a map, you now have a brand, and a brand needs to be managed differently. So we invested a few years ago with Patents and Trademark Office. So the Purple Lizard itself is now ours and protected. The way we do the logo is protected. There's a handful of subcategories of products that are protected. I don't know if we wouldn't have any money to fight anybody that wanted to come after us, but at least we sort of did the right thing. We own that. Our lizard logo was drawn by a Penn State geographer. John Sebastian drew that for me. And then we do a couple things on this little slide. We have a disclaimer. My wife's a former attorney. She likes disclaimers. I didn't like the language, so we wrote what I thought was a more humorous disclaimer. I also really strongly believe that you should put your names of the people involved in the maps on our maps. So all of our maps will list everybody that was involved in this project. And we did a fun little thing there about reproducing your map in digital or format to be invented, and I felt kind of humorous that day, and I thought, except for tattoos, those are encouraged. We published our maps with that, and then people started getting tattoos. So I think that really reinforces that we have created a brand and a loyal following when the Purple Lizard is now being tattooed on our customers' bodies. That's our current product line, 17 maps. Hopefully we will have about 25 products by not 25 additional, but the product line will grow to 25 by the next NACIS if everything goes well in the next 12 months. And that's what we do at Purple Lizard. Thank you. Questions?
How do you decide and prioritize where you're at?
Good question. There's no real strong science behind that for us. It's a lot of it is the organic growth idea. I'll have to flash all the way back to that big map that had all of our stuff. We started right in the center of this map, and basically if somebody's used to a map and you do an adjacent map, right, then in theory your customer base is already ready for that map. Then at some point we wanted to sort of go outliers and work back in. But marketing-wise, it's tricky because like now we just launched Shenandoah. Nobody knows about us in Charlottesville. We don't have market share. When we did other Pennsylvania titles, we already have a very strong audience. It's like, cool, they finally did this part of the state. I'm going to get that map too. So the more you push out, then you have to like reintroduce yourself to those people and get into those stores a little bit more.
It seems like it's quite an investment to create a map, and I don't know a ton about like these kinds of parks. How evergreen are these maps? I mean, does it get to a point where something changes with the trails or the terrain that means that the map that you're distributing can't continue to be safely distributed?
Yes, we do updates every 2 to 3 years. So on the cover of our map, around the price, it says made fresh in small batches. But that is also like, there's a lot of labor overhead on that, because then we try to time how many maps we're going to sell, keep the maps in the market, and then go do the edits on it. We do forge really strong relationships with the land managers and the communities that we map, so that we have a constant channel of communication with all these people.
Oh, so they tell you, like, hey,
We do get feedback, and then I reach out to them and say, hey, we're going to update the map next year, what's in the pipeline. Yeah.
All right, that's all the time we have. Please talk to him later. Sorry, Eric. Sorry. No questions from Eric Steiner.
Thank you, everyone. Enjoy your break.